nothing is perfect. We live in a battle. We live in a war zone, and the reality of good and evil in our world, in our culture is so, it's so real. It is very blatant in your face, and that the destination is not the goal. It is the journey. It's the process. And it's that transformation along the way.
If your marriage was in trouble, what lengths would you go to save it? And when you're on the other side of the battle to win, what would you do to encourage others to stay, fight, and overcome? Hello and welcome to Restoring the Soul, a podcast dedicated to helping you close the gap between what you believe and what you actually experience. I'm your producer, Brian Beatty. Thanks so much for listening. On this edition of Restoring the Soul, Michael welcomes Eli and Kelly Pyke to discuss their emotional journey from a counseling intensive to the purchase of an RV and ultimately a cross-country adventure in hopes of saving their marriage. They documented their journey in the film The Far Green Country, which showed the lengths Eli and Kelly would go to fight for each other's hearts and win. Now stay tuned for the next 30 minutes as we hope you'll be challenged by the Pykes' courage to live intentionally and adventurously. So now without any further delay, here's your host, Michael John Cusick.
Well, I want to welcome to the podcast my friends Kelly and Eli Pyke. Welcome to Restoring the Soul.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having us.
It's a real bonus to me, Kelly, that you are joining us. You are as much a part of all of the story as Eli, and your films, Far Green Country 1 and Far Green Country 2, they have a little different emphasis. And your voice and your story is really the first movie, and the second movie is, Eli, more your story of grief around losing your dad. And I think both of you together, yes, there's amazing cinematography and video involved. There's a great exposure to national parks and all around, but you guys are really storytellers. That's really what these movies are about, and that's really who you are. You're living a story. So can you give some of the backstory as to how you bought a motorhome and drove around the country and filmed it?
Yeah. Well, it came out of basically a desperate need to be intentional about a life change. And that the foundation of that was the birth of our son that basically went in every way differently than we had hoped or expected. I had a pretty long 56-hour labor, pretty traumatic situation for me and Dakota. And thankfully, we were able to be in a developed country in a hospital, or else we probably wouldn't have survived that. But it left me with post-traumatic stress, night terrors, anxiety, and then quickly after that, the exhaustion and just stress of parenting a newborn. We had some pretty deep marital challenges, betrayal, kind of broken trust. And we were in a pretty rough place with our marriage. And we knew that with Eli traveling a lot for work, I'm the extrovert, he's the introvert, me kind of being stuck at home in a sort of traumatic space. We knew we needed to make an intentional change, or else we might not make it long term. And so we had always loved adventure and traveling. We did that while we were dating, did that early years in our marriage before we had kids. And we decided, wow, how can we get back to that? Those are the experiences that bring us joy, that bring us unity, that make our hearts come alive. How can we do that with a baby? And we had never been RV people, but we recognized, wow, we can travel with a little home on wheels with a bathroom and a kitchen and diapers and all the things that having little babies need. And we can still get out and find wildness and find solitude and beauty and try to reconnect. And so it was truly just kind of a desperate move to rescue our marriage.
And Eli, what was it like for you with all of that happening? Were you kind of the one that came up with the idea, or were you needing to be convinced?
Definitely, as I do share in the first film, Kelly's more of the, "Woo, let's go here, let's go there," big dreamer. I'm more of the practical. Well, how are we going to do that? What do we do when we get there? That kind of thing. Kelly, you said it really well. You set up the story there. Just to give a little bit different perspective from my side, we left our house and headed out on the road in the motorhome just about 6 months after my intensive with you, Michael. So in many ways, that season of our life and the journey that we began with the Far Green Country began in your office, and the redemption and healing in a lot of ways started there. Like Kelly said, we were in a really desperate place as I was grappling with, my own self-deception and, the struggles, as a male in a very sexualized world. And then also, my own past and, my upbringing. I mean, there's so much that I was digging into there. The fact that we stayed together as a couple through that season is just evidence of Jesus' redemption and what it means to cling to the promise we made to each other. So it wasn't a few months after the intensive that Kelly and I were sitting in our driveway at the house that really held a lot of trauma for us and memory, good memories there too, but I feel like a place can really hold the memory of trauma in an unhealthy way. And we were trying to figure out if we were going to sell it and try to move on in that way. And then I also was wanting to continue pursuing my filmmaking and video production. And that had become a bit of an issue just in regards to me filming other people, mainly women, that, made Kelly feel uncomfortable and had posed a problem for me and my ability to remain faithful. And so with my eyes, faithful with my eyes. So what I'm getting to here is Kelly was telling me, I don't think I want you to keep doing filmmaking. And she's also telling me I'm not living alive fully. I want to, I'm not really in my sweet spot. I had an amazing opportunity to go and film John Eldridge's motorcycle movie, which is called A Story Worth Living. And they had called and asked me to be one of the crew for that. It was like 4 months out, and I was going to, be flying there and be gone for 2 weeks. And, that was part of just the unhealthy situation with Kelly and I for our marriage, is that I would be flying and I'd be gone a lot. I was working a lot. I was, working for 40 to more 60, 70 hours a week. And we were becoming disconnected. So we were just troubleshooting, like, how do I continue my career doing what I love while also bringing Kelly into a place where she's not alone, stuck at home with young children. It was kind of a practical solution. Well, if we buy a motorhome, then we can travel to Colorado to do this film shoot, and Kelly can stay in the motorhome with friends in Colorado and, not be alone. And it was like, okay, well, let's buy a motorhome and give this a shot. I mean, we almost canceled. We bought the motorhome. We almost turned around and sold it a couple times before we set sail there because it was so daunting. But anyway, that's the kind of the backstory and my perspective of what it was that really kind of kicked us out of the house and onto the road.
Yeah, well, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you so much for both of you talking about some of the more personal aspects and, some of the specifics about where you were struggling personally in your marriage. Certainly didn't expect that, but that's who you guys are. And that's what this podcast is, of course, about. But I really think it's cool that as a couple, that Kelly, you could have a voice and say, this is what I want to be about. I too want to have a career, because you're highly trained in wilderness leadership and in being a wilderness first responder and training for NOLS and that kind of thing. And so at one point, it would have been easy to just go, oh, well, he's the husband. He gets his career. And I guess, there's a line at the beginning of the first movie where you said, my life basically became laundry and scraping food off floors. And I remember those days. And you guys didn't settle for that. You found a creative way that was actually connected to both of your passions and your longing for adventure that has led you now to where you do something that you're absolutely alive and you've gotten your heart back. And Eli, your career is expanding and growing.
Yeah, it's such a gift that we can both be in that place, and that with Eli's work being, remote and traveling from shoot to shoot, now we can do that in our motorhome all together. So there's not these long, lengthy times of separation. And then we spend the summers at camp, which give us this community for part of the year. And I can be just in my sweet spot. And it is, we're super, super grateful.
I want to talk about the movie, of course, and for people that haven't been exposed to it or know about it or seen it, give them the opportunity to know about it, but also to say that I've talked with many, many, many couples that are at this point of something has to change. And without saying names, I go, well, I know this couple. Well, they bought a motorhome and they drove around and now that's their life. And to my knowledge, nobody's done that yet. But I think what's, again, so cool is that there's always another way. There's always another path to go other than just keep on doing more of the same or expecting some big miracle to happen in front of us. That sometimes the miracle happens when we go, okay, we can't make this work anymore. And it sounds like you're setting out on this whole journey was about getting your hearts back because you'd lost your hearts and neither one of you really knew who you were anymore.
Yeah, I'm just reminded of the scripture that says you'll know a tree by its fruit. We were in a lifestyle that wasn't necessarily right or wrong, but the fruit of it wasn't good fruit. I think by shifting our circumstances, we allowed for just the creation of a different type of fruit, which, come out of the metaphor, we were, traveling across the country, going to beautiful mountain places, camping under the stars and, going on hikes with our then 3-year-old and, getting out of that just normal, just kind of wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner and go to sleep kind of lifestyle. Leaving and getting into a motorhome and traveling around the country in no way saved our marriage. Like that's not what did it.
Right.
Because we still fought like crazy on the road. We had some of our lowest times in marriage, like at the very end of that first year on the road. We've had many very low points since. We're talking, I think I came to you in 2015. So 5 years ago, and it hasn't been smooth sailing. So definitely shaking things up was helpful, leaving the house, getting on the road and trying to pursue our passions. But really the reason we're here is continued deep soul work, continued relational counseling, and ultimately just the grace of Jesus and the redemption in the gospel.
Yeah, amen. Well, I imagine that in every way possible, when you're living in the cramped quarters of a motorhome and you're with each other all the time, that would have the potential to bring up every issue that you've ever had, but just into a smaller space and more compressed time. So the old geographical cure. Yeah. Well, there's no such thing as getting away from your problems.
Not at all. And then throw on top of that, trying to make a film about it. It's can be at times very, very stressful. I'll just say stressful.
Really funny looking back on it. Right. But yeah. And, add in the 2 kids, and we also have a dog and a cat with us now. So that's the 6 of us in our little 30-foot home on wheels. So it's pretty pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, just like this is a marathon, right? I mean, marriage is certainly not a sprint. It is a marathon. It is a long peak climb, and it's like our maturation process with God. I mean, it is a lifelong journey, and we're not going to snap our fingers and have everything be perfect. And yeah, like Eli said, I mean, we're in consistent counseling still, and probably will be long term, just because we need that soul care living in the world, and it's a continued just excavation process.
Yeah, if I could live in like just a full-time intensive, like 50 weeks out of the year, it'd be pretty nice.
Well, isn't that what summer camp is when you run the wilderness programs? That's kind of a physical wilderness intensive.
It's true. It really, yeah, absolutely. It's really, really similar. Yep.
Kelly, I want to ask you a question.
Might as well throw in a plug for wilderness
come
trips.
To Ute Trail. Come out on the trail.
Call Kelly if you want to do a soul week on the trail.
What is it? Let's do a shameless plug. The ministry you work with in Colorado, it's a wilderness. I know I'm probably not supposed to say the outward bound, but it's kind of that where you're out in the wilderness and you're learning you're learning to be dependent and develop skills. So talk about it.
Correct. Yeah. So it's a similar, outward bound style. The heart behind it's similar, except it's ministry based, of course. So yeah, it's called Sky Ranch Ute Trail. We're near Lake City, Colorado, in the beautiful San Juan Mountains. We take folks out for a week long, just expedition, backpacking in the gorgeous backcountry. And, it creates a space for quiet and solitude and adventure and beauty, and really coming face to face with yourself and with God and your team members. And so it's a phenomenally vulnerable experience. It's hard. Masks are torn down, and it's truly a transformational week.
And what's the website?
Skyranch.org.
SKYranch.org.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Kelly, you share an oft-quoted statement from Emerson that life is a journey and not a destination. And your comment around that was that you've come to understand that very differently from when you first heard that. Can you talk about, and maybe both of you just comment on what that has come to mean to you, that life is not this destination?
Yeah, absolutely. I think growing up I'd say I kind of grew up in more of a bubble space with my parents. That's how they just created a space where it was pretty safe. And, the ideal was the expectation. And that was a blessing as a child. It gave me a really secure environment. But I think it also gave me these false expectations about marriage and about life and everything going smoothly. And if something was, more challenging, it must not be the right thing. And I think it just kind of misled me in some ways. And so I think that quote really represents the fact that nothing is perfect. We live in a battle. We live in a war zone. And the reality of good and evil in our world, in our culture is so, it's so real. It is very blatant in your face, and that the destination is not the goal. It is the journey. It's the process. And it's that transformation along the way. And ultimately we will all be, at the end, we will all be excited about the destination of eternity. But until then, I think having those kind of false expectations can lead to so much more disappointment and despair and hopelessness. And that we need to take the challenges and take those bumps in the road as opportunities to grow instead of areas to just choose despair. So that's kind of what it means to me.
So many of the themes and scenes and pictures and stories in both movies, it's about just being present to what is, and to on the road, you don't know what's going to be around the next bend. And the beauty of your storytelling and the imagery is that you did such a great job. And some of it is very unexpected, and some of it is tightly knit together. But it's just that idea of being in the moment. And I remember at the clip of the first movie, just the Far Green Country Part 1, it showed you guys before you had kids and kind of the summary of, going down the side of a mountain of snow and being in Uganda and Mount Kilimanjaro, and Eli, you going over, giant whitewater cliffs and stuff. And it was like, anybody would look at that and go, wow, that's life to the full. And then here you are scraping food off the floor and doing laundry and struggling in your marriage. But it's not by going and seizing that moment or going after that moment. It's about being present in life and being awake. And certainly you guys have kind of positioned yourself for that to happen instead of working a 9-to-5 humdrum job. But it's really obvious to me how you guys both have this gift and this intention to be present and have your heart open to whatever's happening in life.
Yeah, there's just heard recently a quote that says, God finds us in the present. Do you remember reading that to me?
Yeah.
I think that the quote, life is a journey, not a destination, it really speaks to the importance of living in the present. I think so often we get caught up in setting a goal for ourselves and aiming toward that goal, whether it's, I want to get married, or I want to get a job, I want to graduate college. And that becomes the goal. But what's most important is how we do it, how we get to that goal. And then realizing that once we reach that goal, life continues. So just getting married is just entering the doorway into the journey of marriage. And relationship with Christ is getting saved and giving my life to Christ. That was entering the doorway. In some ways that was a destination, but the journey continues even now, and I'm still accepting Christ in various areas.
Let me transition to the second movie. Whereas Far Green Country 1 was about your journey, Kelly, the second movie was really about your journey, and particularly grief around losing your dad pretty unexpectedly. Yes. And there's some heart-wrenching scenes in the movie, two of which I want to talk about because I can't imagine what it was like for you. But it opens basically with you giving your dad's eulogy, and it's really emotional. So talk about how losing your dad and grief and wanting to honor him fueled this unexpected part 2.
Shortly after getting the diagnosis of my dad's pancreatic cancer and learning that it may be just a few more months of life with him, we as a family immediately came home and spent time with him. As soon as I could, I got my cameras out and sat down with my dad to just capture his life on camera, and mainly with the plan to, just have a memoir of his life to share with my kids and their kids, and for myself to remember. And that conversation with my dad on camera was the most emotionally connected conversation I've ever had with him. And he and I, as much as we shared a mutual love for each other, rarely expressed it and rarely knew how to just have a simple conversation throughout our life. And in those last few months of his life, actually, finally started doing that, which in some ways is really bittersweet. It's like, how could I go my whole life without really knowing how to talk with my dad? And then only in the last few months learn how to.
Yeah.
But in some ways that was the silver lining, that I had to see the end coming, and in order for my heart to be there. And I think for him too, he really softened in those last days. So what came from that interview and conversation with my dad was his memoir video, which I which I began editing basically the moment I got the news of his final passing. And it was a beautiful and heart-wrenching and tear-provoking 36 hours of editing in my small studio poring over photos of me with my dad and, these conversations we had in the interview, and putting together a 30-minute story of his life and his life with his wife and his kids and myself included, and sharing that at his memorial service, where I did, share a eulogy and then included. So in showing this memoir to people in the audience and myself and seeing it up on screen, and every life has such a touching story. Every life has such passion and nuance. And I was able to share that with the audience of his family and friends. And what that did for me in my own grief process there, it was, I'm lacking words to explain how good it was for me to put that memoir together and to shed tears over these photos as I was taking film footage of the photos to put into the memoir. And it gave me a passion to say, I want to do this more. I want to bring my dad into our films. And it inspired me to want to grieve properly, whatever that looked like. Because when I was honest with myself, I never really knew how to grieve any deaths that had happened to me up to that point. Friends from high school that, had tragic accidents, I would run from that. I would say to myself, "Oh, too bad for them. I'm going to miss them, but there's nothing I can do for them now," and just carry on with my life. And so this was the first time passing to my dad that it was really clear to me that I couldn't do that. I could with my dad. I couldn't just keep going on with life as normal. And sort of like with the first film where Kelly and my marriage really needed a reset. I need a space or a reset in my own life to create the time and place to reflect on my dad and remember, who he was and what he meant to me. And so this film really is an expression of my relationship with my dad, my final thoughts before his passing, my journey after his passing. And I never wanted to set it up as, this is a how to grieve film or any sort of, psychological perspective on what grief is, but rather just, this is my journey with it. And I know very little about it, and I'm going to enter into it and try to invite the viewer into my process.
And I think you really accomplished that. A couple of things stood out toward that idea that you weren't trying to teach people about grief. First of all, there was such an unabashedness about it. It was appropriate, but there was this sense of I'm just going to turn on the cameras and be real and naked. And there were just some moments again that were emotionally pretty intense. And I think that we are so afraid of death, and we're in such denial of death. And it's something that none of us, both for our own lives, but for the people that we love and care about, we don't want to acknowledge it. And you kind of dove in and said, okay, this is going to happen. And I'm sure that at some level there was shock or denial about that, because that's normal. But the scene where you and your dad are talking, and you don't realize kind of until the scene shifts to something else, but you're saying, "I love you, Dad." And he says back, "I love you too." And then you say, "I'm going to miss you, Dad." And he says, "I'm going to miss you too."
Yeah.
And I think that when we know that someone's going to die, if they're in the hospital or hospice, it's like we save those most meaningful words for the very, very, very last moment, right?
Yeah.
And that it's not safe to be that unabashed and that unashamed in your desire and your longing and what you want to expect and what you want to hear and say. But boom, there you were, and you were recording it, so it was just so raw. And then the word intentionality stands out, that there was a sense where you weren't going to be denied to honor your dad and to step into your own grief when you knew that that might be something that you wouldn't do or weren't inclined to do. And I just really, knowing you as a brother in Christ and as a man, I really respected both that unabashedness and the intentionality to say, I am going to step into this.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I on the intentionality piece, I would say that's about all I had, was the intention to try to grieve, whatever that looked like, and and then to document it, because I'd never really done it before. It was really what I think was one of the sweetest parts about the journey of making this film and grieving was the conversations I had with other men along the way that we included in the film, and some that didn't make it, onto a camera. But I set out to, interview friends and other men that we met along the way, and include their grief stories. But it was those conversations that I was actually working through my own grief with other people who are in their grief as well. And that was incredibly healing, and just created the space to be open and, like you said, unabashed with those emotions.
Well, I thought you did a tremendous job in honoring your dad. And there's this sense where, I know for me, as I think about my life, it's like I have to accomplish this big thing or do something amazing, or, in the case of what I do, have a bigger ministry or write a book that's better selling. Yeah. And what you did was, your dad had a PhD and he invented some cool stuff and had a company. Yep. But what you did was you document and told the story and highlighted the accumulation of the everyday things. He took us rafting, and then he went and he took all the remaining money and bought a raft. And that a life is really honorable in the aggregate and not in any one thing that we do. And thus the fact that it's a journey, right? It's about what the journey becomes, not just where it leads to. Yeah. The other scene that just, it literally took my breath away, and I literally had to back it up, and I watched it a couple times, is after that conversation with your dad, there is an aerial shot where your dad is laying in the grass like Christ on a cross with his arms out at his side. And the viewer knows that he's going to be gone and that you have lost him. I'm getting emotional as I talk about this, and it shows him up close, and then the aerial just zooms out as if he's fading away. And I thought artistically that was really beautiful, but also because you were the guy behind the camera, oh my gosh. I felt like I was walking out of a hospice room, with a loved one that I was saying goodbye to them for the last time. What was it like to film that, but also to have to doubtlessly watch that over and over again to edit it, and that was your dad?
Well, first, to watch it over and over again was nothing but healing and tear producing. And even now I can feel it viscerally in my body, the emotion of that scene. As an artist, the satisfaction in having put that scene together is incredible. And when I watch it, I have deep emotion at the very thing I produced, which means it's super powerful. To have filmed it, it's almost like my dad and I teamed up on one last big project, big job for the world to create this scene. And he had no idea that it was going into a film, and neither did I. I simply was just trying to get some B-roll of him after our interview so that I could put some things together. And, somewhere at some point in there, I did have the idea to, have him lay down and just film the camera going up and down. But I think that's one thing I love about art is that oftentimes I don't know where the shot's going to go until I'm putting it together. And so I can't really claim credit for like having planned that scene or anything, but the way that it looked, I think there's many metaphors that could be drawn from that, whether it's his spirit, floating away into the afterlife, or just the viewpoint of the creator, of how small we are, and yet he loves us. And also just how fragile our life is, and how at any moment it can wisp away.
Yeah. Thank you for all of those thoughts. That's beautiful. And one of the things I really appreciate about you is you're really good with the tech side of things, and you're a good storyteller. But I've always thought that your cinematography and your artistry is really extraordinary. And I just hope that you get more and more opportunities to create, because that creating is part of the journey as well. That, you brought something into the world, just like you've brought your children into the world. You bring something into the world when you create that remains. And if one person watches that, and as I saw that image and as I was moved by that then adds to me. And Kelly, what you're doing as you're, investing hours, days, weeks, and months over the summer, working with folks in these wilderness experiences where they're vulnerable, you're creating something, and something is being built in. And so I like to have conversations that go all over the map, but that, I know you guys are passionate about restoration, and that you want your lives to be helping people become whole and to know Jesus, and see his heart, which makes us whole. But I think you guys are doing that in really incredible ways together as a family, and in your respective callings, and just being who you are.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's sweet, and it's been really, really special to invite our kids into that as well already, and how even Dakota at age 8 and Isabel at age 4 are stepping into that, journey of being a blessing to others and inspiring others. And it is truly a gift and honor.
Well, I know you guys have a meeting with Steven Spielberg in about 5 minutes. So or was it Martin Scorsese? I'm sorry. I always get the two, I'm confused. Who's the one with the eyebrows, the caterpillars on his forehead? That's Marty. Okay. It's really a joy to talk with you. And I want to tell as many people as possible about the movie. I know that the first movie's been out a couple of years, but people are still hearing about it, as well as Far Green Country 2. So thank you for taking the time to share with me about the movies, about your journey, and about your heart.
Thanks, Michael.
So fun to connect with you again, Michael. And yeah, folks can find us at Amazon Prime. If you have Prime, the films are free to watch. And then we do have Instagram and Facebook, so you can follow us there. We'd love to connect with folks. So we really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us too.
You bet. I appreciate you guys.
And for any of your listeners who do engage with the film, we're happy to, converse and, just reach out to us, over social. Kelly gets that, or over email. And I have one thought that I wanted to share. I read a book years back by Donald Miller called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And it describes his own journey meeting with filmmakers who wanted to make a film about his life. And he is looking at his own life through the eyes of a filmmaker or a storyteller and saying, what is it about my life that's actually noteworthy or, interesting enough really to be in a movie? And in some ways, I feel like that has provided inspiration for me, especially in the kind of crazy moments of what we're doing and trying to live on the road and make movies about it and stuff. But we are literally making movies about our lives. And it really makes me and us be honest about what is our story? What are we living for? What do we want people to see when they look in literally on our life? And I think that there's a lot of inspiration in that, whether there's someone who is out there hearing this, that their life is going to be told someday or shown or not. We all have that opportunity to ask ourselves, what do I want my life to be? What is the story I want told about me? Because I told a story about my dad. At the end of our lives, there will be a story told about us in one way or another. And what do we want that story to be?
And we don't have to be a famous author like Donald Miller or a Steven Spielberg or an Olympic gold medalist. We can just be us with our, quote, ordinary life. And in really awakening to that and being present to that, our life can become epic. And there is no such thing as an ordinary life.
So thank you for listening to another episode of Restoring the Soul. We want you to know that Restoring the Soul is so much more than a podcast. What we're all about is helping couples and individuals get unstuck. You know how some people go to counseling or marriage therapy for months or even years and never really get anywhere? Our intensive programs help clients get unstuck in as little as 2 weeks. To learn more, visit restoringthesoul.com. That's restoringthesoul.com.